Hello, everyone, and a warm welcome to today's session, a guide to incident response framework, IR planning and testing essentials. I am Shilpa Goswami, and I'll be your host for the day. Before we get started, we would like to go over a few house rules. For our attendees, the session will be in listen-only mode and will last for an hour, out of which last 15 minutes will be dedicated to Q&A. If you have any questions during the webinar to organizers or our speaker, please use the Q&A window. Also, if you face any audio-video challenges, please check your internet connections or you may log out and log in again. Now, about our speaker, Eder Ribeiro. Eder graduated from Roger Williams University School of Law, earning his Juris Doctor. He has also earned a Master of Science in cybersecurity. He has led TransUnion Incident Response Forensics IRF team over the last 6 years. In his leading from the front style, Eder has led the IRF team through thousands of cases ranging from unauthorized cryptocurrency mining, ransomware, business email compromises, and much more. Eder also has 16 years of experience in the US Rhode Island Army National Guard, where he led troops as a team leader on a combat deployment in the Kandahar Province in support of Operation Enduring Freedom. Eder is a certified mediator and performed duties at the state headquarters level. Eder expertise includes solution product creation, program development and expansion, threat assessment, risk mitigation, security process improvement, privacy compliance, and contract drafting. He has worked with over 1,000 organizations in his current capacity, helping them determine and react to the nature of the security incident breaches and determining the best course of action to recover to safe operations and meet compliance obligations. Without any further delay, I would hand over the session to you, Eder.
Good morning, and thank you, Shilpa. Good morning, everyone. It's much appreciated. As Shilpa mentioned, Eder Ribeiro, happy to have this fourth in our 5-episode series in all things incident response. Today, we are going to talk about the incident response plan. We're going to talk a bit about incident response testing, and we'll talk about the most common types of testing and some details there that will help kind of loop it all together into the picture of the overall IR incident response cycle and that we've previously talked about. I'll make some callbacks to the previous sessions, but rest assured that if you have not attended the previous sessions, that you will not be lost by what we will cover here today. Every session is contained, so it'll make sense beginning to end, regardless of whether you attended the previous sessions. But if you did attend, it'll help because those callbacks will make the most sense, and you will see how everything ties in together, which is how we built this series. If you have not attended the previous sessions, they are available on YouTube. Just search for Easy Counsel and Incident Response, and you can find the videos there pretty easily. In the previous sessions, we covered a myriad of topics from ransomware negotiations to business email compromises and all sorts of different fun stuff that we deal with on a regular basis here in our DFIR shop. So without further ado, let's go over an overview here as in slightly more detail than I just mentioned. Today, we're going to talk about why organizations should budget for IR plans, for testing, and et cetera. There's a reason for it, and there's a reason why I want to talk about budgeting right in the beginning, because as the security professionals, some of you will find yourselves in DFIR shops, so therefore you may be in a position of influence to advise clients on what really they should be doing pre-incident and post-incident, and all those things are going to surround money, because in the end of the day, almost pretty much nothing is free, especially in the cybersecurity world. So clients, your clients or the organizations you work for need to really focus on where their resources are best spent regarding security, because there's a lot of different stuff out there that can really start sucking up resources really quickly if they are not keenly aware of that situation. And then from there, we'll talk more in detail about the actual IR plan itself, And we'll move on to testing and how this overall topic of planning and testing fits in the overall cycle of healthy, proper cyber hygiene, cybersecurity posture, and your overall cyber efforts. So IR planning, let's start there, right? Why do you do IR planning? Well, it's probably obvious for most of you based on your topics of interest and your attendance here, but it still bears repeating that all organizations who are connected to the internet, which pretty much nowadays is just about all organizations, but especially those who are dependent on their digital systems in order to operate, must prepare themselves to respond to a cyber incident. There are plenty of wise sayings or common phrases you hear on the internet around our industry. Some of them are very true, and the idea of that cyber incidents are a if or a when, not an if, is absolutely one of them. Just about every business, I would say a vast majority, over 90% of businesses are going to, at some point in their lifetime, have a cyber incident. Is that cyber incident going to be catastrophic? Hopefully not, but some kind of incident will likely happen to a business. And in order to respond to something that can have very negative impact on your ability to conduct business, one should be prepared if you are to respond effectively and if you are to mitigate the damages that these incidents can cause to a business effectively. And so it all starts with a plan, because otherwise you will find that you will not be best equipped to handle the incident when it happens if you haven't already thought about it and planned for it and taken actions on that plan. And we will cover that in detail shortly. So a detailed incident response plan, right, will do all those things. But part of a detailed plan also requires testing. This is a part here of the session today, which is a bit, I would say, maybe unique. I don't see it presented this way very often. Folks often talk about the plan or the testing in separate sessions. And then it totally makes sense because they all deserve, like, we could have a session on every single one of these things that are multi-hours long. But obviously we have less than an hour to talk about these things. But I think it would be of value to you in your capacities to get a holistic overview of IR. And that's part of the point of our series. And testing works hand in hand with planning if you're really being effective. And that's why we're presenting it together here, because testing is part of the plan, and testing is a critical part of, should be a critical part of your plan that will allow you to, one, reduce your chances of having a catastrophic cyber event. Two, it'll reduce the risk of just overall exposure to cyber incidents. And ideally, it will prevent incidents. And the results of tests are parts of your cybersecurity posture that should likely be built into your plan. So they work hand in hand, which is why I think there's a lot of value in talking about these things together. So when we're, let's start then now in the deeper dive here and talk about the actual incident response plan, or the IR plan. There are, today we're going to talk about the must-haves. We're going to talk about the nice things to have that are, good to have, but not exactly critical. And then we're going to touch on a couple common things that we see in the market, which are, for many orgs, not useful, if not an actual waste of resources. And so that's important to know as well, right? Where to not invest in. So what are the must-haves in an incident response plan? Well, you must have a map, right? You have that's part of what a plan is when you really think about it. This kind of plan isn't something that's written in stone, that's unchangeable. This kind of a plan has to be a living document, as it's often referred to, meaning it's something that will evolve and change over time. And therefore, it has to be a map that gets updated. That map also has to take into account inventory of your digital landscape. So this roadmap has to account where everything that you have is located, status of your inventory, and specifically, we're talking about your actual like digital components, right? So in order to create this map at a, in a well-defined and precise manner, which will give you the best results, you have to start one with understanding what is your current landscape looks like now, meaning, what does your edge computing look like? Do you have servers, or, how are they hosted? What operating systems do you have in place? Do you have equipment that's in end of life cycle status? Or do you have something that's close to EOL that you are going to need to update sooner than later? Because again, resources, right? Most businesses, I shouldn't say all, but pretty much, the vast majority, if not almost all businesses, don't have unlimited resources. And certainly, confidently, you can say all businesses don't have unlimited resources as part of their cybersecurity budgets and plans. All organizations have budgets for every sector of the org. And so that wouldn't be any different for InfoSec or, cybersecurity, however it is that your org is splitting or calling that side of the company. And of course, if you are in a position where you're in a DFR shop, in the digital forensics incident response shop, or something where you're selling these services, security services, then your clients will certainly not have unlimited resources. If they did, they would likely be in that space themselves. So you have to take into account some of these things right in the beginning, because they may be hard costs that will take away from resources that you may want to apply to testing or to other valuable items. So understanding what you have on hand is an absolutely critical early step, if not really the first step, in drafting your roadmap, which is your incident response plan. We advise that when drafting and creating these plans, one of the next, if not the most important next piece of consideration, critical piece of consideration, is for you to create and understand what the roles for the individuals in your organizations or departments in your organizations, depending how large your org is, what those roles are. Very detailed. Because when an incident happens, it's a stressful, very, very stressful moment for any org. And it's an all hands on deck type of scenario. And the reality is, people tend to be at a, very stressed and running around. So sometimes people default to previously trained methods of operation or ability to operate. You may have, depending on the cyber incident, an impact in your even ability to communicate within your own channels, right? Think of like a ransomware situation where a lot of your systems may be encrypted. You may not have email if you're hosting that on premise. You certainly may lose your Teams or Slack channels in your ability to communicate the way you do every single day. That sort of event can cause a lot of havoc, chaos and confusion within an organization. So it's really critical that your leadership has its roles really well defined. So when an incident does happen, those leaders can immediately spring to action to not only start the mitigation, the discovery, and all the other parts of the IR cycle that we've talked about, where we're talking about the actual pushing out the threat actor. We're talking about eradication, where we're talking about remediation of your compromised environment. Yes, absolutely. That all those efforts needs to start right away. But it's also on leadership to do the soft skills kind of work, right? The people work. It's on your leadership to be able to get everyone on the same page, to be able to calm people down a bit, because a lot of chaos and confusion may be happening. So I can't overemphasize how important it is, for these roles to be well defined. In our experience, especially in the micro to SME, and in the small to medium sized businesses, we really see a lot of confusion sometimes happen when there is not a clear understanding of roles, because you have, now at this point, micro not as much, because they tend to be very small leadership teams, but smaller to medium sized businesses, the leadership teams are bigger now. No one, if you don't have clear roles, no one knows what it is they're supposed to be doing. Therefore, they are often late to take action, which then allows more time for the threat actor to cause further damage. This can lead to higher business interruption costs. This can lead to longer remediation. It can have really critical impact. So be very, very careful with how you are defining your roles, how you're assigning roles, what leader is best equipped to handle certain roles. And that ties right next to this next bullet, because roles and responsibilities go hand in hand. They are, they're partners in crime there. So every role has to have its responsibilities very clearly defined in your incident response plan. I really suggest spending time here. A lot of folks go through this first 3 bullets really quickly when they're drafting a plan. They just say, well, the map is we want to achieve proper cyber hygiene and good security, and we have 3 key leaders in the org, so they're just going to be the ones in charge of things, and they're just going to handle everything, and then they move on to workflows and figuring out other components of the response plan. But then when the incident happens, you quickly realize that because you don't have roles and responsibilities well defined, you find that the leadership is not adequate at making educated and proper decisions effectively and quickly. And in the very early phases of the cyber incident, that's when swift action is needed more than ever, because it can be the difference between an event being catastrophic, or an event just being somewhat painful to the org, or the event being not so painful and being something that you can overcome decently quick. That requires a very strong leadership team that clearly understands their roles and their responsibilities. When you're assigning responsibilities, you as the security provider, you might be thinking, well, like, what is my role here, right? But you do have a role, because you have to remember audience at all times, especially when it comes, really at all times in anything business related, but especially when it comes to IR planning. Your audience here is the leadership at the organization, whether that's your own organization and you are, a member in the security team helping draft this plan or helping put the plan together, or whether you're selling IR plans essentially as a service. Whichever role it is that you find, you definitely, as a security expert, have an important role in helping the business people understand the intricacies and details of their digital landscape, of specific types of issues that can happen if specific systems go down, or if there is a disruption in how systems internally communicate, or how you plug into cloud resources. All these things are things that you are keenly aware of as the security professional, and you understand how they work. But the CFO or the CEO or the COO, and a lot of those members may not be well aware or at all aware of how these things work. And if you're not in a slightly larger organization, a medium-sized to large organization, you may not have a CTO, some sort of technology officer, or a security officer like a CISO or something of that sort. And if you're working in a DFIR shop, we're assisting your end clients with drafting these plans or revising these plans, then very likely than not, those clients may be smaller businesses who may not have a C-suite at all. So then defining roles may become even more challenging because their inherent org may not have roles as so well defined. So I really wanted to spend the time on this because of how critical it is to set a strong base, a strong leadership base as a head of your roadmap, because otherwise it becomes very easy to lose track of where it is that you're going. From once you establish who's going to do what, who's best equipped to do what, who has the best skills to do certain things, and you create those roles and responsibilities, you need to start thinking about the workflows within your plan. And ideally, your workflows are going to be guided by two primary factors. And these are sub bullets. Think of it here under workflows. One, it's going to be incident driven and incident related, and the other one would be based on roles and responsibilities, based on leadership. Okay, so what do we mean by that? Your workflows need to match specific incidents. Okay, your plan shouldn't just have a very generic workflow, that applies to any kind of cyber incident. It's good to have a generic plan in case there's something that's unknown, in case a user reports irregular activity, that you're suspicious that maybe something nefarious is happening, but you're not exactly, encountering smoking gun evidence that something bad has occurred, right? Or that you have an actual incident on hand. So a generic plan is good, but if you want to be most effective, your plan also has to cover very specific types of events. So you should have a ransomware response plan. You should have a business email compromise response plan. You should have a lost device plan, especially if your organization has remote, employees, right? If you have folks working from home or in a hybrid status, what happens if somebody loses a laptop, or what happens if somebody loses a work phone or a personal phone that's connected to work environments? You should have in detail in your plan how you eradicate the threat, how you mitigate the threat from expanding into something else, how you who is involved in all of these things, and then how you move forward after it. How do you review the potential incidents? Are there, if you have something like a lost device happening, do you have the ability to investigate what happened? Do you have the ability to remote wipe devices? All these intricacies need to be covered in your plan. So when you break down your workflows based on incident, you should then do a deep dive based on that incident. So if we're talking about a ransomware incident, okay, in your plan, you need to cover, okay, what does our backup apparatus looks like? Where's all our data? How often do we validate data? You may not need to, of course, have the last data was validated. Not every organization would reasonably be able to keep updating their plan that often, but you should know how often you're supposed to be validating your backed up data. So at least your leadership has an immediate idea that they can fall back on their plan and say, okay, we back up this often. We have backups in this many locations. We have cloud backups here. We have cold storage backups here. We have hot storage backups here. These backups all get validated this often. Now let's go to whoever's responsible for maintaining these backups and make sure that they have, that they are already working on validating and making sure that, when's the last time we validated this data? Is it good to go? Can we now just remediate systems and move on? These are all things that are going to drastically speed up your ability to respond to a ransomware incident and successfully overcome a ransomware incident. Same thing for, if we're talking about a business email compromise, your plan should cover in detail How do you remediate accounts? What methods of multi-factor authentication do you offer? How often do you swap tokens, or should you be swapping? Is it an incident that requires you to do so? There's all sorts of different details, and it doesn't make sense to try to go too deep into those details here, because they're going to be subjective to the use case for your clientele or your org based on the infrastructure they have in place, based on how you configured the environment. But the key takeaway here is your workflows should be first and foremost broken down by incident type, and then have a generic piece. And you should go as deep as you can, as you reasonably can, into each type of workflow. And then don't forget that incident type needs to also always, again, pay attention to the audience. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, the audience here is always critical. These workflows have to make sense to not just you, the security professional who's helping draft the plan, but it needs to make sense for a financially thinking person like a CFO. It needs to make sense to an operations focused person like a COO or CEO of your organization. So you need to keep that in mind. And these workflows also have to call, and they should be communicating directly with the roles and responsibilities, right? So it should be clear, to anyone reading, or perhaps your plan should even make direct mention of, at this phase, X role has to take this action. When we're dealing with a ransomware situation, this person needs to take this action at this time and then communicate to this person. Make it interactive. That way it becomes a very clear roadmap that a leadership under stress can follow without too many hiccups. The next thing to consider in your incident response plan, as you're creating workflows and as you're figuring out who's going to do what, is also, more likely than not, unless you're in a very large org, and even large orgs usually have external support, is who are your support entities? Is the type of incident you have something that has a privacy impact? If so, you might need legal counsel faster in that type of incident, to come in faster than that kind of incident than others. So that's something to keep in mind, whether you have an internal legal department or you need external counsel to come in and support to mitigate privacy risks and other legal risks that can come from these incidents. Same thing with external SOC or investigative forensic type support. If you don't have that support already built into your internal SOC or within your internal security InfoSec team, your plan should absolutely cover who is our forensic provider. Who do we go to ensure that they will come in right away and help us with evidence preservation, with data collection, with starting an investigation. Perhaps the forensic vendor will also help you with eradication of the threat. Those services are all out there from MSSPs or DFIR shops. Shops like ours, we offer all these services. So these are things that you should know, and it should be very clear in your plan who it is that you're going to go to that will help your internal teams put out the fire, that will help your internal teams get things back up and running, and will help you overcome the incident quicker. As the organization you're working with will become larger, I do want to make a special mention to this. You're going to then start seeing a lot of what we call retainer agreements, right? Now, these are also going to be mentioned in your plan if you have a retainer agreement in place, which is why we're bringing this up here. And that should be very clearly marked, because if you have a retainer agreement with, say, a forensic vendor, that means your organization has already taken the steps to, have a financial interest. They're contracted, and likely there's an exchanging of resources here, funds between your org and that vendor, that if something happens, that vendor is going to be there very, very quickly. So that has to be very clearly marked on your plan, because the last thing you need is to have a leadership entity, a leadership person, start shopping for support when somewhere in your plan buried there is a phone number for a vendor you're already retained. So that would be awful, but we have seen that happen before. So make sure that you're very clearly marking who it is that can support you, what their roles are, how they fit into your response plans, who's the point of contact at your support entities, what kind of support can you expect from them? Is it 365 or 363? Is it within operating hours? What are those hours? All those details should be in a support entity section. And of course, you need to ensure that as you're updating your IR plan, you're also reaching out to these vendors to make sure that personnel have not changed or that their capabilities have not changed. You would be surprised how often we work with clients who have an MSSP in place and things happen in that business, and perhaps some of the services they have changed, or their ability to perform certain services have changed, sometimes for the better, sometimes not. And the client's not exactly made aware of those restrictions, and it can cause more chaos in what's already a stressful situation, which is the cyber incident. And then, of course, your plan has to cover your post-incident strategies, right? What happens when you fixed it? What happens when you've overcome the problem? You've now understood what longer-term damage, if any, and hopefully none, the incident has caused. Once you have put the fire out, once things are starting to come back to normal, this is still a time for you, especially as the security expert, to continue being aggressive here. You will find quite often than not that this is when the non-technical leadership starts to relax, because they've been stressed for several weeks, if not a few months, dealing with a cyber incident, and they start to now slow it down. And this time is critical post-incident, shortly post-incident, because this is the best time while everything's fresh in everyone's heads to figure out how, now that we have information from forensics or from whatever level of investigation you did and information gathering, why did this happen? What can we do to keep this from happening again, or at least lower our chances of having it happen again? Now is the time to make sure that you are absolutely covering these things. And once you fully cover these items, that you update your plan to include these mitigation efforts. Okay, very important part. But those are the must-haves. Those are the things that if I review an incident response plan and it's missing any of those things that I've just talked about, those are going to be red lines. I will absolutely, start working to build those items back into the plan. The things that are nice to have, but are certainly not mandatory to have in a plan, is to have detailed tertiary plans for, secure every single piece of security within the plan, right? So if your plan covers that you have cloud backups, you have local backups, does it need to cover the, USB drive that has, files from a specific department that department head likes to keep in case even the other backups fail? Maybe, depending on the type of organization, maybe depending on the type of data that you're hosting, it would be nice to have. It would be nice for every organization to know exactly where any kind of useful data is being hosted. But is it critical for you to have? No, especially, again, most of the content in this series is focused on micro to medium-sized businesses, right? So we're not talking really large orgs. But most of the time, no, because while it's nice, it would be nice to have all those detailed plans, as long as you are doing all the major stuff right, you should ideally be in a good place where that granular of detail won't be necessary in your plan, because your plan will take care of pretty much every incident that will come your way adequately. But it would be nice to have. If your plan has budget data that you have throughout the year for proactive work, for testing and for further planning, that would be great. And of course, if it has budget data also for when the incident happens. A great example of this is in your ransomware workflow. is there a ransom budget information there? Meaning, how much money is your company willing to put out if they are in a position to have to pay the ransom? We don't recommend paying ransoms, but we also live in the real world. And in the real world, we understand that sometimes some clients end up having to pay. And we talked about this in detail back in session 2 when we talked about ransomware negotiations. So please go see that session, watch that session if you have not attended it and are curious about more about ransom negotiations and ransom budgets. But that's an important thing to know. What level of funding do you have in place? This is where you're going to parts of your plan that should talk about cyber insurance if you have it, that should be talking about lines of credit and things of that sort. That would be nice details to have in your plan. But it's not common that we see plans that are so detailed that it talks about financial resources that are available at the time of an incident. Okay. It would also be nice to have in the plan upcoming dates for cybersecurity testing for a multitude of reasons. One, because you can then always refer to your plan as a true guide for your cybersecurity posture. That plan can really help the organization stay focused. So it's a really nice thing to have for those purposes. But when an incident happens, you also don't want to be in a place where you're like, oh, okay, well, our annual pen test is supposed to happen next week. I now have to go deal with that vendor. It would be nice to, not be surprised by someone reaching out to you and say, hey, are you going to be ready to start your testing next week when everything is stressful and you're in the chaos of, putting out, remediating a cyber incident and eradicating a threat? That's the last thing you want to deal with. So you should know those dates and whether they're coming up, so you can adjust them. And so, in case you need to recall some of those financial resources, or in case you need to just reschedule them, because now you're going to have to make major changes to your network. So now might be a great time for a pen test, and now you have a pen test coming. Well, let's maybe stretch that for another month or two. So those dates would be nice to have in the plan. But again, not a requirement. Eventually, you will find it if you don't have it in your plan, but it's nice to have. And then details on business apps, business applications, and tools. If your plan can fit some information, it would be nice to have some detail on software, and hardware that you may be running, especially if you are in manufacturing, if you're in a business that has a big logistical apparatus, meaning shipment and freight and that kind of thing. Those applications, those business applications that you're using for software, for inventory management, for shipping, for manufacturing details, you need to have a keen understanding of how those applications work, what happens if they go down, what level of support do you get from whatever company actually provides you with that software, and if it's a baked in-house, you need to know who are the people that can, who are your true in-house experts regarding those applications, so they can get those applications back up and running. Because if they go down, they may be the most critical parts of what really makes your ability to operate under the stress of an incident, or your ability to operate at all, work, right? Those business apps may be kind of the lifeline for the business under an incident. So it would be nice to have put that in your plan, even to that level of detail, what those apps are, who do you deal with if something goes wrong with them. But it's not necessarily a requirement unless they are, the last example I gave, that it's absolutely critical. And if that one app goes down, you're out of business. But besides that, little caveat there to the that one exception to the rule, it's just a nice thing to have in plans. And then again, cybersecurity budget covering your next 3 to 5 years, with its key goals. So that's where end of line or end of life scenarios come into play, right? It would be nice to have in your plan a date for when you have to replace servers, or for when you have to replace X workstations, or when you have to migrate X, a bunch of your systems to the next operating system. All those things can create large costs to an organization. They're rarely found in an incident response plan, but they should be there, especially when it comes to software. You made some of those agreements can often be in the works for months, and your finance department may be dealing with a lot of that on their own. And then if you don't know, if the rest of the business isn't keenly aware that those costs are coming, you could have a scenario where an incident happens, bad timing, with some bad timing, and now it impacts your ability to respond to the incident because you just spent resources on upcoming goals. So understanding what those resources are in the plan would be nice to have, but it doesn't happen often enough that I would say it's a critical part of a plan where future cybersecurity budgetary items cause an impact to your ability to overcome an individual, a specific incident. So we're going to talk about testing really quick. I don't want to go too deep into testing just because it's such a big topic that it would be impossible to do true justice to either of these tests with the amount of time that we have for this session, even if this is all we were talking about. So we're going to do this overview here. The most common types of tests are definitely the penetration test. I'm sure you all have heard of it. Some of you will probably do these, and some of you probably are well aware that unfortunately nowadays too, there's a lot of other types of testing that are out there in the market that are not true penetration tests, but they're sold as penetration tests. So it's important to understand what is a penetration test, right? And a penetration test, when you really break it down, it's a simulated cyber attack on a system that you are doing in order to evaluate the weak points in that system and or network. So these are the red team, blue team type operations that you hear, the war games type operations you hear about. Companies should pen test, but a lot of times all companies should pen test, but it's about really when to pen test. Is a yearly pen test necessary? For a large organization that has assets in all over the place and a really complex digital landscape, more likely than not, yes, they'll probably need to do a yearly pen test. But for your micro to small, medium-sized entities, a yearly pen test, more often than not actually necessary. Their networks are too static. A pen test is really there for when you make major changes or any change that can have a more than subtle impact on your network. That's when you really want to focus financial resources to pen test. And pen tests can be very expensive. It can be tens of thousands of dollars for a pen test. For a proper pen test to happen, they can take a long time. They require a lot of training of your internal resources, because you have to back up, certain parts of your network. If you're doing a pen test on your production environment, which is usually the most recommended because of you want to have normal traffic happening during the test, so it's as accurate as possible. It's not always ideal to do a pen test on a non-production environment, on a segregated testing environment, because even if you put stress in that environment, it might not respond the same way because it doesn't have daily user traffic. So you have to take precautions before you go into these tests. And so when you combine the inner work, when you combine the fact that most SMEs, micro SMEs, have networks that barely change on a year-to-year basis, a yearly pen test is likely not necessary. So know when to pen test is a very important thing. The types of pen tests you're also looking for is also critical here. Are you going to do a non-accredited pen test, which essentially means the red team has pretty much no information about your network and about your business, and they have to start the test as if they are a threat actor that is scanning for a target and happens to stumble upon your company and decides, all right, I'm going to target this company. And they have to work from there to try to penetrate your network and get into your systems. And from there figure out what kind of damage they can cause with the weak points and vulnerabilities within the environment. Versus an accredited pen test, when they have information already about your network and they start with a much clearer understanding of what your landscape looks like. So it's a more targeted and focused, usually quicker penetration test. There's value in both. And this is something that perhaps is best left for a pen test session, but there is value in having both because of the different techniques that red team has to implement in order to penetrate the network and give you a better understanding of what your outside perimeter security looks like. So that goes hand in hand again to the goals of the pen test. Again, these things can be very expensive. So you want to make sure that the goals of your organization are very clearly defined ahead of the pen test, because otherwise you can find that you're going to get a report that won't be as helpful to you increasing your security posture as much as you think it would have been for the kind of money that you ultimately end up spending. And again, then that comes, of course, with what, that ties to the last bullet. You should know exactly what to expect. Are you going to get a report? What is that report going to look like? What kind of items should you be expecting to get on that report? Do you get post-call reports with your pen test team, or do they just deliver a report and that's kind of it? You're going to find both of those out there in the industry. Not every company will provide you the support where they will do detailed calls with your leadership or your InfoSec team, or assist you with remediation of certain weak points post the pen test. So these are all things you need to think about as a leader in the cyberspace when you're advising your clients or your organization. And your IR plans should be fully drafted and implemented prior to an incident, and this should also include updates that are periodic after a major event. Okay, so that's going to go into testing. I skipped a slide here on vulnerability testing. I just realized that, which is why I was like, okay, this didn't make as much sense as I was expecting. So let me strike that piece there. Quick mention of vulnerability testing, right? So vulnerability testing are tests that you are aiming at identifying and quantifying specific vulnerabilities that you then rate based on a level of critical impact to your environment. So vulnerability tests are the ones that are often a bit more automated. They will usually put out a large amount of results between low-level vulnerabilities to medium to high level to critical. And these tests will happen a lot more often in most organizations, or should be happening a lot more often in most organizations than the penetration tests. They're often a lot less expensive to purchase if you don't have those skill sets within the organization. Some of it is continuous. That can be from, as you can think of continuous testing as even, I guess, antivirus or endpoint detection response software, to actual perimeter scans that you may buy as a package from a testing entity, where maybe once a month they are testing your edge computing for external vulnerabilities. So it can be that continuous. It can be as passive as honeypots or other DMZs and other internal network security measures. And along with vulnerability scanning, malware scanning, and things of that sort. So there are going to be multiple types of vulnerability tests. Ideally, you should be checking for vulnerabilities very frequently. One, because patches and updates can have an impact, can create certain vulnerabilities. Changes you make in configuration can create vulnerabilities. So you need to be likely doing some level of vulnerability testing fairly frequent, with the goals of understanding what are the critical vulnerabilities, making sure that you can then take action on them as fast as possible, and then identifying from there the lower and lower levels of vulnerabilities and where they fit in your IR plan for remediation of those vulnerabilities. Your medium level or low level vulnerabilities may be something that's part of your, maybe in year 3 in your IR plan, because maybe they really don't pose as much of a risk to the business, but it would be something nice to eliminate from your risk landscape. So those are things that you have to put in mind when you're building these things and when you're updating these plans, okay? So as I accidentally mentioned earlier, these plans should be fully drafted and implemented prior to any cyber incident, which would be ideal. And they should be periodically updated, and at least once a year, we recommend updating your IR plan, even if you're a small business, at least having a read through it and allowing that plan to guide some action about, is everything still the same way it was? Have we made any changes? And of course, this plan should absolutely be changed and updated after a major incident. Okay. These organizational IR plans should ideally guide you through any security incident or almost all security incidents, and you should ensure that the results of your activities during an incident are recorded in your plan. A great plan will identify, well, last time we had this kind of incident, this is the stuff that we thought we did really well. This is the things we thought we really needed to improve on. And then what have we improved on? And was it enough? Was that improvement enough? There should be a section in your plan open to that. And that section would be a great piece to have, because it allows also for great conversation at the leadership table about what to do next and how to update the plan next, so it's the most custom, well-built guide, roadmap for cybersecurity for your organization. That's all the time we have today. I want to thank you all very much for your time. I look forward to answering any questions now. We also have EC Council's kind to have set up a group on Reddit called Cyber Leaders, where you can submit questions there. I will check on that group later today, and I actually check on that group periodically and address questions that you folks may have. So I look forward to interacting with you there as well. I hope that you found this session helpful. And we have one more session in the series coming up next month, and I hope to see you there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eder, for delivering such an insightful and informative session. We found the webinar very engaging and hope it was valuable for you as well. Now, before we begin with the Q&A, I would like to inform all the attendees that this EC Council Certified Incident Handler maps to Incident Handler or Incident Manager role. Anyone with an ECIH certification is eligible for 17,000 plus jobs on LinkedIn globally with an average salary of $73,676. If you're interested to learn more about our programs, kindly take part in the poll that's going to be conducted now. Let us know your preferred mode of training and we will reach out to you soon. Eder, shall we start with the Q&A?
Absolutely.
Okay. So our first question to you is, how can we align incident response with compliance obligations?
Everywhere, really, especially nowadays, right? Every business is so reliant on digital systems, and businesses who have heavy compliance duties will always have to understand how their data, how their business systems impact their ability to remain compliant. So it's everywhere. Here at TransUnion, we are obviously a very compliance-driven organization. So basically at every single step, we are always thinking about the compliance aspect, right? If you make certain changes to how you store data in this place, how does that impact you from a SOX perspective, or from a a GLBA perspective, or from a privacy law perspective? This is why in your IR plan you need those roles well defined, and you need the responsibilities for each roles well defined, because your legal team will have to have a critical part of that plan. I mentioned this in the very beginning of the session, and whether you need external counsel support, whether you have certain risks that come out about an incident. It's not just privacy, but other types of compliance incidents. Risks come out of cyber incidents. So, for example, if you are a publicly traded entity in the United States, you have, and say you're in a business where you take in personal information of clients, you may have privacy compliance issues that you may have to deal with because of an incident in response to the state you operate in. But then, because you're publicly traded, you now also have reporting and compliance duties that are part of the Securities and Exchange or the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission's rules and guidelines. So the compliance is there everywhere, everywhere in this whole cybersecurity operation. Make no mistake, it'll always be a thing to consider.
Thank you, Eder. Our next question is, what advice can you give to someone who is IH and IR enthusiast and has a certification in cybersecurity technician and certified ethical hacker?
What advice? Can you read the beginning of that question again? Is that what they asked for?
IH and IR enthusiast and has a certification in cybersecurity technician and certified ethical hacker. That means CEH.
There's plenty of advice. It's a tough question to answer just because I don't know exactly specifically what advice, but if you're looking for where to go work advice, there's a lot of places for people with your skills. Every InfoSec team within any company that has a robust InfoSec team needs somebody with those ethical hacking skills, to supplement their penetration testing, internal testing teams. You have the skills that you may have there may also be very critical in the leadership role, in being able to understand risks and advise other leadership teams in risk. Of course, if you're looking to gain employment in a forensics shop, in a DFIR shop, there's certainly a very strong need for people with those skills. So there's a lot of advice that I can give there. It's a tough question, really. Because the question is so general in a way, I have to give you some general advice, I suppose. Figure out exactly what you're passionate about in this space, because there's so much opportunity in the cybersecurity world. As you heard in the video in the beginning of the session that Shilpa played, there's a 0% unemployment rate in cybersecurity. There's so much opportunity that we're really fortunate to be in a position to where you're able to stop and think, what do I like doing the most in cyber? What am I the most passionate about in cyber? And where can I really put my skill sets? And then focusing, making sure that that's what you do more often than not in your job. And that's going to just be beneficial for you as an individual. That'll make you happier, hopefully, and it will also be the best results that you will produce. So that's my advice. What you do with those skills. Those are pretty broad skills. So you're quite useful, whoever you were that posted that position. You have great skill sets. So make sure you put them to good use.
Thank you, Eder. Our next question is, what is basic difference between incident procedures and incident plan?
Well, the basic differences between procedures and plans, that procedures really are the workflow. It's just what you do when this part happens. The the key differences between that and an IR plan is all the other things that we talked about. A true plan doesn't just focus on when this happens, these people do this. It has to have considerations that are beyond that are beyond just the procedures you take when something happens. It has to have a real plan looks into the future. The real plan is going to provide information that isn't as just focused on action, but it's focused on fully understanding what the business is, what its risks are, what steps and procedures it must take when something happens, but then even, like I said, understanding what happens down the road, and how to become better. That's a big part of the plan, is how to become better. That's also just a big part of cyber hygiene in general. So those are the key differences there between procedures and a real plan.
Thank you, Eder. We'll take last two questions for the day. The next question is, how often do you recommend testing IR plan?
At least yearly. At least yearly. I mentioned that, I think, a couple slides ago. Again, this is going to be very much dependent on the type of business you are, the kind of exposure or risk that your business has from a cyber perspective, right? That's often driven by the type of data you host, the type of business, services you provide, size of organization, and that's also going to drive what kind of review, right? If you're a three-person tax advisory, your tax preparation shop, your network likely doesn't change much. The review of that plan can be done once a year, and it probably is a pretty painless and quick thing to do, because most likely than not, you haven't had much change in your digital landscape. Now, if you're a complex manufacturing operation with multiple locations, perhaps even international reach, you likely need to look at that plan a few times a year to make sure it's keeping up with all the changes that you inevitably must be undergoing as an organization, because at that level, things are always in flux. You have different departments that are doing different things. They're upgrading and updating, potentially finding problems, changes in leadership. All the stuff requires updating of the plan, so it becomes a lot more frequent. That addresses the question.
Thank you, Eder. Our last question is, can you explain the concept of dwell time and incident response?
Dwell time. Yes, I mean, simply put, dwell time is bloat. It's not something you want to have, and it's something that your incident response plan should help you reduce. Dwell time is going to be, how do I put this in simple ways? Essentially, it's an amount of time that happens in between your ability to execute on your goals. So dwell time may be time that you spent spooling up new resources or bringing in those retained vendors. These are all things that you should look to maximize at all times, so you have the fastest, most efficient plan for your business.
Thank you again to our wonderful speaker, Eder, for answering those questions and for the great presentation and knowledge shared with our global audiences. It was a pleasure to have you with us, and we are looking for more and more sessions with you. Now, before we conclude the webinar, Eder, would you like to give a small message to our audiences?
Yes, again, I want to thank you all again for your time today. I hope to see you next month in the last session of the series, where we're going to talk about data mining and manual review. It's one of the critical steps that often happens during an incident, a cyber incident, and it should be something that you all have some level of understanding at, regardless of where you are, because either you are going to be in a place where you will be involved in that process, or you at least will be in a place where it'll be happening around your activities. And I find that a lot of folks in our industry don't have a better understanding of that process. And that process can really have an impact on the business ability to respond to a cyber incident. So I look forward to seeing most of you, and hopefully all of you next month when we cover those details. And again, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn and also on the Reddit Cyber Leaders page, and I will address more questions there. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Eder, for this message to our audiences.